You. His voice wasn't loud, but the venom in his words drew attention. The judge hadn't arrived yet. The court officers exchanged glances. No one stepped in. Serena stood her ground, graceful but firm. Matthews didn't like her tone, or her defiance. Without warning he reached out, gripping her arm. "You need to leave now," he growled. Serena's lips parted in shock, but she didn't resist. Instead, she carefully reached into her inner coat pocket, her movements slow, deliberate. Matthews tensed, expecting a weapon. But what she pulled out froze him mid-motion. A black leather badge wallet, open to reveal a gleaming FBI badge and ID. "Special Agent Serena Grant," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let go of my arm." The silence that followed was deafening. Matthews' face drained of color instantly. The courtroom fell still. Cameras from media outlets trained their lenses toward the front. The same officers who had looked away earlier now shifted uneasily. One whispered to another, "Did he just manhandle a federal agent?" Matthews' grip slackened as if the badge burned him. He stepped back, his mouth working but no words forming. Serena straightened her blazer, eyes unwavering. "You've just assaulted a federal officer in a courtroom. That's obstruction and abuse of authority," she said. Every journalist in the room started scribbling. The tables had turned in seconds and Matthews stood exposed, not as a protector of justice but its violator. The judge entered at that moment, confused by the tense atmosphere. He asked what had happened. Serena didn't need to explain. The cameras had already captured everything. Matthews, humiliated, tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. The judge requested a private word with Serena and the court bailiffs took Matthews aside. What followed was even more shocking. Serena wasn't just a visiting agent. She was there for an interagency audit regarding racial profiling within local law enforcement. Her visit had been scheduled. Her name had been listed. And Matthews had blown right past all protocol. The court buzzed with whispers after the recess. Word spread like wildfire. A black woman, dragged in public by a white officer, who turned out to be an FBI agent overseeing his department. The irony stung harder than any punishment. Serena didn't press charges on the spot. Instead, she did something more powerful. She stayed. She remained in that courtroom, watched the hearing, and later spoke during the press conference outside. Her words were clear. The badge is supposed to protect the people, not elevate the powerful. It wasn't just a clash between two individuals. It was a mirror held up to the system. In the days that followed, social media exploded. The video of Matthews dragging Serena went viral. So did the freeze frame of him staring at her badge. Comment sections filled with outrage and support. Civil rights groups picked up the story. News anchors debated it on prime time. Matthews was suspended pending investigation, while Serena's quiet courage became a national conversation. Her story exposed how deeply prejudice can hide even inside justice itself, and how power, when wielded with humility and resolve, can shine even in the darkest corners of our institutions. The courtroom was still reeling when the woman calmly stepped back inside, her FBI badge now clearly visible on her hip. It glinted under the fluorescent lights like a sword of justice, slicing through the murmurs of disbelief. Judge Hawthorne, who had stood by silently earlier, leaned forward with sudden interest. Officer Barnes, the once confident cop, visibly paled as he realized the gravity of what he had done. The black woman turned to face him, her voice calm but firm. "You dragged a federal officer out of a courtroom without cause. Do you even understand the law you're supposed to uphold?" The silence that followed was heavier than anything else said that day. Lawyers, jurors, even the bailiff, all were stunned. The badge changed everything. She wasn't just a woman defending her rights. She was the law, and Barnes had just assaulted it. The judge stood abruptly. "Ms. Daniels, would you care to explain what just happened?" Her name was Special Agent Tiana Daniels, and as she laid out her case, the room hung on every word. She had been sent by the FBI to observe court proceedings involving a high-profile corruption case. Her presence in that courtroom was not random, it was deliberate. Barnes had interrupted a federal investigation by acting out of prejudice. As she recounted the events leading up to her removal, pointing out inconsistencies and unlawful behavior, her professionalism made it even clearer how wrong Barnes had been. "I didn't come here to make headlines," she concluded. "But I won't be disrespected in a country I serve and protect." Her dignity and restraint only amplified the power of her position. What had started as a scene of abuse was now a reckoning. It didn't take long for internal affairs to arrive. The court, now essentially frozen in place, turned into an impromptu investigation scene. Agent Daniels handed over her body cam footage. Yes, even federal agents wore them now when working sensitive civilian operations. The video left no room for interpretation. Barnes had singled her out because of her race. He never asked for ID. Never questioned her calmly. Just made assumptions and acted violently. Barnes tried to defend himself, stammering about suspicious behavior and courtroom protocol, but no one was buying it anymore. The prosecutor looked visibly angry, realizing how Barnes's actions could jeopardize an entire case. The defense attorneys had already started whispering about mistrial. What one man's prejudice nearly destroyed, one black woman's courage and composure was now working to save. Then came the twist. Not only was Agent Daniels assigned to this case, but she was also a regional supervisor, meaning she outranked most of the officers in that courtroom, including Barnes. As news of her position spread through the judicial ranks, the room's energy changed again, this time into embarrassment and awe. Daniels turned to Judge Hawthorne one last time. "I'll be filing a formal report with the DOJ, including all conduct observed in this courtroom." The judge's face flushed, not from anger but shame. Barnes was removed, this time not by force but quietly by internal affairs. He didn't look back. And just like that, power shifted. What started as a scene of racial profiling had become a lesson in restraint, authority, and real justice. The audience in the courtroom, once silent bystanders, gave a small but respectful nod. Justice was not just served, it had stood up and spoken for itself. The courtroom slowly emptied, but its atmosphere remained thick with reflection. Outside, news crews had already caught wind of what transpired. They swarmed the steps of the courthouse, but Agent Tiana Daniels walked through them untouched, calm, poised, uninterested in glory. For her, this wasn't about revenge or headlines. It was about setting a standard. Inside the precinct later that week, Officer Barnes was officially suspended pending further investigation. But it wasn't just his fate that changed. Others began examining their own roles. The judge, once passive in the face of injustice, issued a public statement acknowledging the failure of courtroom decorum. Even the prosecutor promised mandatory anti-bias training across county departments. It was the start of a ripple effect, one woman's dignity turning into a mirror for an entire institution. Daniels hadn't just stood up for herself, she forced the system to look at itself differently. Weeks later, Daniels was invited to speak at the FBI Training Academy. Her story had become a case study, not for the drama it held, but for the way she navigated it, with patience, power, and professionalism. Young recruits listened intently as she said, "The badge doesn't protect you from hate, but it gives you the power to confront it with integrity." Her words resonated far beyond Quantico. Across the country, the incident inspired renewed discussions about race, authority, and the invisible battles black professionals face every day, even while wearing a badge. Daniels received letters from women across America, lawyers, teachers, doctors, even janitors, thanking her for standing tall when it would have been easier to shout, easier to strike back. But Daniels never wanted applause. She wanted evolution. Because real change, she said, doesn't begin in the news, it begins in the quiet choices people make when no one is watching. Back in her home city, Daniels returned to work as usual. No press, no fanfare. Just the same woman walking the same halls, quietly fixing what others break. But her colleagues looked at her differently now, with more respect, more awareness. The courtroom incident had shown them something rare, strength without spectacle. Meanwhile, Barnes's career unraveled. His actions weren't just condemned, they became a national example of why unchecked power is dangerous. Civil rights groups praised the outcome, and state legislation began pushing for courtroom protocol reform. Daniels, however, never gloated. She often told close friends, "I wasn't trying to change the world that day, I was just trying to remind one man that I'm human." That reminder had turned into a movement. And though she wouldn't admit it, Daniels had quietly reshaped the justice system without breaking a single rule. Her silence had roared louder than any protest. So what's the lesson here? It's that power isn't about how loud you speak, it's about how firmly you stand when silence tries to erase you. Tiana Daniels walked into a courtroom as a target, but walked out as a symbol. In a world where black women are too often questioned, cornered, and underestimated, she reminded everyone that strength doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes it just needs to show up. Her story is a reminder to all of us, whether you're wearing a uniform, a badge, or just your skin, that no one has the right to decide your worth. And when someone tries, let your truth do the talking. Let your courage speak louder than their ignorance. Because as Daniels proved, The most powerful statement doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes, it comes from standing still and refusing to move for anyone who doesn't see your value. The courtroom was tense. A low murmur swept through the benches as a black woman in a sleek navy blazer stepped inside. She held her head high, exuding quiet authority. But just as she moved toward the front row, a loud voice pierced the silence. "Hey, you don't belong there." A white police officer, tall and red-faced, stormed toward her. Within seconds, the atmosphere shifted from orderly to chaotic. Cameras clicked. People gasped. But what happened next flipped the room on its head and left the officer frozen in place. Welcome to Talecraft, where true stories turn into unforgettable tales. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe because we bring you the stories that don't just entertain, they change how you see the world. Now let me ask you something. What happens when someone in power misuses their badge, only to find out they're messing with someone who outranks them? Today's story isn't just about a racist cop abusing authority, it's about karma, justice, and the explosive moment when silence turns into strength. And it's a story that proves, you never know who you're dealing with until it's too late. The woman that officer dragged out of the courtroom? She wasn't a defendant. She wasn't a bystander. She was an FBI special agent, one of the highest ranking in the region, and her presence in that courtroom had a purpose. But the cop didn't see that. All he saw was skin color, and he let that blind him to everything else. What followed was a stunning reversal that left the entire courtroom stunned. It's a moment that should make every officer, every judge, and every citizen ask, are we truly seeing people for who they are? This story matters because it speaks to something deeper than one courtroom confrontation. It's about the daily battles people of color fight, even in places meant to uphold justice. It's about a system where prejudice can still wear a badge. But it's also a story of hope and power, of what happens when a woman who spent her life protecting others finally gets to protect herself, in the most dramatic way imaginable. So buckle up. Because over the next few minutes, you're going to witness a story that starts with disrespect, and ends with a badge that silences the noise. The courthouse was buzzing with typical morning activity, lawyers with coffee-stained folders, families waiting anxiously, and officers maintaining a tight perimeter. Among them was Officer Brent Mallory, a 14-year department veteran known more for his attitude than his service record. He stood near the courtroom doors, arms crossed, scanning faces. When he saw a well-dressed black woman walking in alone and confidently, something in him twitched. No words were exchanged at first, just a hard stare. The woman, unfazed, made her way to the gallery. But that stare lingered, turning into suspicion, then assumption, and within moments, confrontation. "Ma'am," Officer Mallory barked, striding toward her like a man on a mission. "This area is restricted. Are you lost?" The woman glanced at him, calm but firm. "I'm exactly where I need to be." That should have been the end of it. But for Mallory, the confidence in her tone and the calmness in her eyes challenged him. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said louder. People in the courtroom turned to watch. The woman sighed, slowly reaching for her purse. But before she could grab it, Mallory snapped, "Stand up. No. Hands where I can see them." Gasps echoed through the chamber as the officer grabbed her by the arm. "You're not going to resist and make this worse, are you?" he said, twisting her wrist slightly. Her eyes didn't flinch. "Officer," she warned, "you're making a serious mistake." But he wasn't listening. In his mind, he'd already drawn conclusions. To him, she was another outsider disrupting court order. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't care to know. And with each second, the scene turned uglier. Spectators pulling out phones, whispers rising like a storm. But the woman didn't resist. She waited, for the perfect moment. As he escorted her out, gripping her arm tightly, the woman finally paused near the courtroom exit. Her eyes swept across the room, calm and deliberate, before locking onto the judge. "Your Honor," she said sharply, "before I leave this building unlawfully detained, I suggest you ask Officer Mallory to check my credentials." There was a beat of silence. The judge looked up, slightly confused. And why would he do that? The woman gently pulled out a slim black wallet from inside her blazer. She flipped it open. The golden FBI badge gleamed like fire in the courtroom light. The hush in the courtroom was immediate. Officer Mallory's grip loosened instinctively, his face draining of color. "FBI?" he muttered, backing up half a step. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Senior Field Agent Dina Lawson, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division." She turned toward the judge. "I was sent here on official business regarding a federal witness in protective custody." I had clearance to be seated and observe the proceedings. Until your officer decided my skin tone was reason enough to disregard protocol. The judge's gavel slammed. Officer Mallory, unhand her immediately. But the damage was already done. Now all eyes were on Mallory, not with admiration or support, but with something far colder, scrutiny. The phones that had captured the beginning of the scene were still recording. Mallory stood frozen, his authority stripped away in one gesture. Agent Lawson didn't gloat. She simply adjusted her sleeve and walked back to her seat without another word. The judge, now red-faced and rattled, ordered a brief recess. Outside the courtroom, murmurs erupted. People debated what they'd just seen. One moment she was a suspect in Mallory's eyes. The next she was his superior in every way, by badge, by law, and by dignity. That morning the courtroom learned a lesson that wouldn't be forgotten. Prejudice, especially when backed by a badge, has consequences. Officer Mallory assumed authority gave him the right to judge, without question, without courtesy, and without checking facts. But Agent Lawson's silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. The kind that lets ignorance reveal itself before dismantling it in one decisive moment. This wasn't just about her badge. It was about who she was, and how many people like her get disrespected daily simply for walking into a room. Today she didn't just flash a badge. She flashed the truth. And it burned. The doors of courtroom 3B creaked open and all eyes turned. Officer Greg Matthews stood at the side, arms crossed, already frowning. He had heard whispers of an important guest, but hadn't seen anyone special walk in. Then he noticed her, Serena Grant, calm, composed, and unapologetically black. She wore a simple pantsuit, no visible credentials, no entourage. Just her quiet dignity. Greg narrowed his eyes. Something about her presence irked him. Maybe it was her confidence. Maybe it was the way others cleared a path without her asking. Whatever it was, it made him feel small, and that he couldn't tolerate. As Serena took a seat in the courtroom gallery, Matthews approached her, boots heavy on the tile. "Excuse me, miss," he said with a smirk, "this section is for court officials and press only." Serena turned her head slowly, meeting his stare. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied calmly. Matthews scoffed. "You people always think the rules don't apply to